6. The court was crowded with people in need, people in cases, and witnesses, and the seats in the hall were filled with attendees from all classes, and in the chest sat the judges with flowing beards and white faces, and a small statue of the goddess of justice, Thebes, was hung on the chest of their president. The two companions took 2 seats close together, and Leto said to Asphines in a whisper, "They are imitating our systems at face value." They looked at the faces and realized that most of those present were Hyksos. The judges were hastily summoning the accused and interrogating them, and issuing rulings quickly and without mercy. The voices of complaint and wailing rose from the naked people with bronze bodies and brown faces. The turn of the sought-after woman came, so the herald called out, saying, "Mrs. Abana." The 2 men looked eagerly and saw a woman approaching the podium with balanced steps. Her appearance indicated dignity and sadness, and her features were beautiful despite her reaching 40. A Hyksos man wearing luxurious clothes followed her. He bowed to the judge with respect and said, "Your honorable judge, I am the representative of Commander Ark, whom this woman assaulted, and he is called Kem, and I will represent his greatness before the judiciary." The judge shook his head in agreement, which surprised Leto and Asphines, and then said, "What does your lord accuse this woman of?" The man said with denial and resentment, "My lord says that he met this woman this morning, and he wanted to have her as his maidservant." She responded to his action with denial and ingratitude, and pushed him away with insolence, which he considered an assault on his military honor. The man's speech caused an uproar and resentment among those present, and heads came together in whispers and denunciation. The judge pointed to the people with his scepter, breaking the silence, then he directed his question to the woman, saying, "What do you say, woman?" The woman maintained her calm, as if her despair of fairness had given her safety from fear, so she said calmly, "This man's statement does not apply to the truth." The judge became angry and said, rebuking her, "Be careful not to say anything that detracts from the position of the great accuser, or your crime will be doubled. Judge her and leave the judgment to us." The woman's face turned red in confusion, and she said while still maintaining her calm, "I was walking on my way to the fisherman's neighborhood, when a vehicle blocked my path and an officer got out and invited me to ride without any notice or prior knowledge. I was terrified and wanted to confront him, but he grabbed my hand and told me that he would honor me by joining me to his wives, and I told him that I rejected what he was offering me, but he laughed at me and told me that a woman's apparent rejection was the same as acceptance." The judge gave her a gesture that silenced her, as if he was upset that she would come up with details that would embarrass the officer's position, so he asked her, "Answer, did you assault him?" "No, sir. I insisted on my refusal, and I tried to evade his hand, but I did not attack him either with my hand or with my tongue, and a large crowd of the people of the neighborhood bear witness to my saying." "You mean fishermen?" "Yes, sir. Their testimony will not be accepted in this holy place." The woman remained silent, and a look of bewilderment and confusion appeared in her eyes. The judge asked her, "Don't you have anything else to say?" "No, sir, and I swear that I did not hurt him by word or deed." "Your accuser is a senior person and a leader of the Pharaonic Guard, and what he says is true until you provide evidence to refute it. How can I overturn it, when the court refused to listen to my witnesses?" The judge said angrily, "Hunters do not enter this place unless they bring accused persons there." The man turned away from her, and went back to his fellow judges and exchanged his opinion with them for a while, then he sat up in his session and said, directing his words to Mrs. Abana, "O woman, the leader wanted good for you, so you rewarded him with the worst punishment, and the court gives you a choice between paying 50 pieces of gold or 3 years imprisonment and flogging." Those present listened to the ruling, and satisfaction appeared on all faces, except for one who shouted in a revolutionary voice as if he had lost control, "Your Honor, this woman is wronged and innocent, so release her, pardon her, she is wronged." But the judge was overcome with anger, and he looked at the shouting person with a look that silenced him, and attention turned to him from all directions, so Asphines recognized him, and said to his friend in astonishment, "He is the young man who was angered by our conversation with him, and accused us of being slaves of shepherds." Asphines was angry and hurt, so he continued and said, I will not let this foolish judge throw this woman into prison. Leto said with concern, our mission is greater than supporting an oppressed woman, so be careful not to let your work turn against us. But he did not listen to his friend, and waited until he heard the judge asking the woman, saying, do you pay what you are asked to pay? He stood up and said in a beautiful, sweet voice, yes, Your Honor. Heads turned towards him, examining the generous and courageous person who came forward to save the woman at the last moment. The woman looked at him in astonishment, as did the young man who defended her with tears and pleading. As for the commander's deputy, he directed a fiery look at him that flashed a threat, but the young man did not care about anyone and walked towards the judge's podium with his tall stature. His graceful appearance, his beautiful and charming countenance, and the required fine led to the court. The judge thought in confusion, as he asked himself, where did this farmer get his gold from? Where did he get this courage? And he did not find any alternative, so he approached the woman and said, O woman, go free, and let what you almost hesitated about be an admonition and a lesson for you. 7. And they all left the court, Leto, Esphines, Mrs. Epana, and the strange young man. On the way, the woman looked at Esphines, and said in a voice that could barely be heard, Sir, your chivalry saved me from the darkness of prisons, and you took my neck with your beautiful deeds, and charged me with a debt that I cannot fulfill. The strange young man snatched his hand and kissed it, his eyes filled with tears, and he said in a shaking voice, May the Lord forgive my previous mistrust, and may he reward you with the most beautiful reward for what you have bestowed upon us by saving my mother from the absences of prison and the pain of flogging. Esphines was overcome with emotion and said gently, Don't worry about this. Lady, you have been afflicted with ugly injustice, and even if injustice falls on one soul, it offends all just souls. I only got angry and vented my anger, for there is no debt and no loyalty. This statement did not convince Mrs. Epana, and she continued to stumble in her confusion and say, What a noble work! What a work that is beyond description and beyond praise! As for her son, he was no less affected than her, and he saw Esphines looking at him and said apologetically, When we met, I thought that you were the work of shepherds, because of your appearance of wealth, but now you are two generous Egyptians. I do not know where you came from, and I swore not to leave you until you deigned to visit our little hut. Let's have a cup of beer together to celebrate the pleasure of meeting you. What do you say? The invitation pleased Esphines, who wanted to mingle with his people. The young man's chivalry and beauty attracted him to him, so he said, We accept this invitation with great pleasure. The young man was happy, as was his mother, but she said, I beg your pardon, because you will not find a hut worthy of your high status. Leto said tactfully, The two owners of the hut are rich in everything, and yet we are merchants who are accustomed to making a poor living and living on the road. Then they all walked with one feeling of affection, as if they were friends from an ancient era, and on the way, Esphines said to Ibn Epana, How should we call you, my friend? As for me, I am Esphines, and my friend is called Leto. The young man bowed his head in honor, smiling, and said, Call me Ahmose. Esphines looked as if someone was calling him, and he looked at the young man with a strange look. After walking half an hour, they reached the hut. It was as simple as a fisherman's hut, consisting of an outer hall and two small overlapping rooms, but despite the simplicity of its furniture and its obvious poverty, it was clean and well arranged. So Ahmose and his two guests sat in the hall and opened the door wide to give them the Nile breeze and view. Meanwhile, Epana went to prepare the drink, and they remained silent for a while, exchanging glances. Then Ahmose said after hesitation, It is a wonder for a person to find Egyptians with such handsome appearance as you, so how could the shepherds let you get rich when you are not one of their handiwork? Esphines said, We are Egyptians from Nubia, and we entered Thebes today. The young man clapped his hands in astonishment and joy, and said, Nubia, many people fled to it during the herdsmen's invasion of our country, so are you two immigrants? Leto was by nature very cautious, so he quickly said before Esphines answered, Rather, we are among those who migrated before that for trade. How were you able to enter Egypt, when the shepherds closed the borders? The two men realized that Ahmose, despite his young age, knew many things, and that Esphines felt affection and reassurance towards him, so he told him the story of their entry into Egypt. During his conversation, Abana returned carrying mugs of beer and grilled fish, so she placed drinks and food in front of them, and she sat listening to Esphines' story until he concluded it by saying, "Gold amazes people and captivates their hearts. We will go to the ruler of the south and present to him the valuables that we carry. We hope that he will agree or obtain approval for us to exchange trade between Egypt and Nubia, so that we can return to our previous work and trade." She presented them with cups of beer and fish, and said, "If you succeed in your purpose, you will carry out your work alone. Neither shepherds are satisfied with working in trade, nor are Egyptians, in their current state of poverty and misery, able to participate in it." The two merchants had something to say about that, but they preferred to remain silent about it, and they went to eat fish and drink beer, and they praised the lady with the most beautiful praises, and complimented her naive table, so her face turned red, and her tongue glowed with thanks to the young man for his beautiful deed. And she was greatly moved, so she said, Have you extended your generous hand to me at the right time, and how many miserable Egyptians are being crushed by the grindstone of injustice in the morning and evening without finding any help?" Ahmose seemed vulnerable. He had barely heard his mother say this until his face became red with anger, and he said sharply, "The Egyptians are slaves. Crumbs are thrown at them and they are beaten with whips. As for the king, the ministers, the pimps, the judges, the employees, and the owners, they are all shepherds. Today's authority is for the whites with dirty beards, and the Egyptians are slaves in the lands that they were yesterday's owners." Esphines looked at Ahmose while he was speaking with eyes filled with admiration and sympathy, while Leto kept lowering his eyes to hide his emotion. Esphines asked him, "Are there many people who are angry about these injustices?" "Yes, but we all suppress anger and tolerate abuse, like the weak and helpless, and I wonder, is there anyone else for this night? 10 years have passed since the Lord, angry with us, agreed to drop the crown from the head of our king Signir." The hearts of the two men beat violently, and Esphines gasped, and Leto looked at the young man in astonishment and then asked him, "How did you know this history at your young age?" "My memory preserves a small, but clear and indelible image of the first days of misery, but I owe my mother the knowledge of the history of the story of Tiber al-Asifa, which she keeps repeating to my ears." Leto looked at Ibana with a strange look that made the woman upset, so he wanted to comfort her and said to her, "You're a virtuous woman and your son is a noble young man." Leto said to himself that the lady was still being cautious despite everything, and he intended to ask about some matters that concerned him, so he changed this for the future, and the sheikh tactfully changed the course of the conversation and diverted it to trivial aspects, so he restored tranquility to the souls. And serenity covered them and they all shared a feeling of affection. Conclusion: when the two merchants were about to leave the house, Ahmose said to Esphines, "When will you go, sir, to the governor of the south?" Esphines said, wondering at the question, "Maybe I will go tomorrow." "Please." "What is it?" "I will accompany you to his estate." Esphines was pleased by this, and said to the young man, "Do you know the way to it?" "The right to know." Ibana tried to object to her son, but he silenced her with a nervous gesture of his hand. Esphines smiled and said, "If you don't mind, you will be the guide to her." 8. The first half of the second day was spent preparing for the ruler's visitation, and Esphines was fully appreciative of the value of this visitation, and knew that the lives of all his hopes depended on some of its consequences, as well as the hopes of those he left behind in a plant whose great souls were filled with despair and hope. So he loaded his ship with boxes of antiques, pearls, and cages. The strange animal and the dwarf Zulu, and a large number of slaves, and shortly before noon, Ahmose met them, and he greeted them with joy and said, "I have been one of your slaves since this moment." So Esphines clasped his arm, and the three of them went to the cabin, and then the ship sailed towards the north in clear weather and a favorable wind. The people in the cabin were silent, and each of them was absorbed in his contemplations, directing his eyes to the shore of Thebes. The ship passed through the neighborhoods of the poor, and approached the smelly palaces sunk between the cupboards. Palm trees and sycamore trees, birds of every kind and color, flocking over them, separating them, and behind them spread green fields, crossed by silver streams, valleys, palm trees, and vines, grazed by bulls and cows, and tended by patient, naked peasants. On the shore were set up drains of the Nile to the tunes of gentle songs. The breezes rustled the trees, carrying in their folds the hissing of plants, the chirping of birds, the bellowing of bulls, and the scent of flowers and winds. Esphines felt the fingertips of memories caressing his burning forehead, and he remembered the days of spring when he would go out to the fields, carrying his royal howdah, with slaves, guards, and peasants walking in front of him, greeting him with joy in his pure childhood, scattering roses on his happy path. Ahmose's voice woke him up, saying, "This is the governor's palace." Esphines sighed and looked to where the young man was pointing, and Leto looked with them, a look of astonishment and denial in the old man's eyes. The ship limped toward the palace, its oars still, and a warboat full of soldiers blocked its path. An officer shouted to them in violence and arrogance, "Get away with your dirty ship, peasant." Esphines jumped out of the cabin, approached the wall of the ship, greeted the officer with respect, and said, "I have a special message to His Majesty, the ruler of the South." The officer gave him a sharp, brutal look and said, "Give it to me and wait." So the young man took the book out of the pocket of his cloak and gave it to the officer. He examined it patiently, then ordered his men to direct the boat toward the garden steps. He called a guard and gave him the letter. The guard took it and went toward the palace. He was absent for a short time and returned quickly to the officer and confided to him some words. The officer motioned to Esphines to approach. On his ship, the young man ordered his navigators to row until the ship docked in the palace harbor, and the officer said to him, "The great man is waiting for you, so carry your goods to him." The young man issued his order to the Nubians, and they carried the boxes, including Ahmose, and others lifted the animal cages and the Zulu howdah. Leto said to the young man as he bid him farewell, "May the Lord grant you success." Esphines followed the caravan, all of them crossing the grassy garden ground in complete silence. 9. The merchant went to meet the ruler, and a servant led him to the reception hall, and his servants followed him with their burdens, and the young man found himself in a very luxurious and elegant hall, where art was evident in its floor, walls, and ceiling, and in the chest of it the ruler sat on a comfortable armchair, in a loose robe as if it were a block of solid structure. The features of his large face were strong and clear, while the look in his sharp eyes indicated courage, valor, and serenity. Esphines pointed to his men, and they placed the boxes and cages in front of them. He approached the center of the hall a few steps, then bowed in reverence to the ruler and said, "May God bless you, O eminent ruler." Then the ruler gave him one of his strong, penetrating glances, missing his noble appearance and his towering height. His face appeared relieved to see him, and he asked him, "Are you really coming from Nubia?" "Yes, my lord." "What do you want from this trip?" "I aspire to gift the masters of Egypt antiques from what is found in Nubia, hoping that they will like them and ask for more of them." "What do you ask for that?" "Some of the grains that exceed Egypt's needs." The ruler shook his big head, with a sarcastic look in his eyes, and said frankly, "I see you are young, but you are a bold and adventurous person, and fortunately for you, I love adventurers. Now show me the antiques you carry." Esphines called Ahmose, and the young man approached the ruler and placed his box at his feet. The merchant opened it, and what was inside it appeared to be rubies and ornaments of various shapes. The ruler examined it with eyes in which greed, covetousness, and admiration were evident, and he proceeded to turn it over in his hands. Then he asked the young man, saying, "Are there any of these ornaments? Many in Nubia?" Esphines answered tactfully, and he had prepared the answer before he entered Egypt. "It is amazing, my lord, that these precious stones are found in the remotest jungles of Nubia, where ferocious beasts are harbored and deadly epidemics spread." Then he showed the ruler a box of emeralds, a second of coral, a third of gold, and a fourth of pearls. The man examined them slowly, fascinated, until in the end he looked like an ecstatic drunk. He then showed him the cages of deer, giraffes, and monkeys, saying, "How beautiful is this animal in the palace garden." The ruler smiled as he said to himself, "What a young man who is like the devil and irresistible." The ruler's astonishment reached its end when the curtain of the howdah was raised, and Zulu appeared with his strange appearance. The ruler could not help but stand up, approached the howdah and turned around, wondering, "What a wonder, is it an animal or a human?" Esphine said with a smile, "Rather, it is a human being, my lord, from a large population. This is the most amazing thing I have seen and heard." The man called a servant and said to him, "Invite Princess Amenrides, my husband, and my brother." 10. Those whom the ruler had invited came, and Esphines decided to lower his gaze out of politeness, but he heard a melodious voice that shook his soul severely, saying, "Why have you disturbed our council, O ruler?" So he peeked at those entering, and saw in the forefront of them the princess who had visited his caravan yesterday and picked out the emerald heart. Her appearance was as usual, blinding the eyes, and doing to her what intense glare does. The young man was certain that the ruler, Kunzar, and his wife were inevitably from the pharaonic family, but he saw another face that was not new on him, and it is the face of the man who followed the princess and the ruler's husband. He was the judge who sentenced our father yesterday, and it was explained to him that there was a close resemblance between him and the ruler. There is no doubt that the princess and the judge knew him as well, because they looked at him with a meaningful look, and the ruler was ignorant what was happening around him of silent acquaintance, so he bowed to the princess and said, "Come, your highness, look at the most beautiful things that contain the stomachs of the earth and the strangest things that carry its surface," and he walked around the boxes laden with precious stones, animal cages, and Zulu's howitzers. So they approached her in passion, astonishment, and admiration, and the dwarf received his share of denial and the strangeness. The ruler's husband was the most astonished and admired of them, and she was in love with jewels with a proverbial love, so she approached the ivory boxes with great enthusiasm. As for the judge, he turned to Esphines and said to him, "Yesterday I was asking myself about the source of your wealth, and today I know everything." The governor turned his face towards them, and said to his brother, "What do you mean, Judge, we will die? Did you know this young man before now?" "Yes, Mr. Governor, I saw him yesterday in court, and it seems that he is very proud of himself and his wealth. He donated 50 pieces of gold to save a peasant woman accused of insulting Commander Rak from prison and flogging. So, sir, you see that the leader was injured in one day by a peasant woman who insulted him and a peasant who defied his anger." Princess Amenrides laughed with a gentle, sarcastic laugh, and said, taking a look at the young man's face, "What is the wonder of that, Judge? We will die. Isn't it normal for a male farmer to roll up his sleeves to defend a female farmer? The truth, my lady, is that the peasants cannot do anything, but it is gold and its magic, and those who said that if you want to benefit from the peasant, impoverish him, then beat him with the whip, are right." As for the ruler, he was by nature very impressed by the acts of daring and valor. He said, "The merchant is a brave young man, and his storming of the borders of our country is only a sign of his courage. Hooray! Hooray! I wish he were a fighting man so that I could fight him. My sword has become rusty from being kept in its sheath for so long." Princess Amenrides said in her sarcastic tone, "Judge, how can you not have mercy on him? We will die while he condemns me." "Are you saying he condemns you, your highness? What a word!" She laughed at the ruler's astonishment, and told him how she saw the caravan, and how Zulu lured her to the ship, where she picked out the beautiful necklace. She told her story in a tone that showed her freedom and boldness, and her penchant for sarcasm and humor. The ruler's astonishment subsided, and he said to her playfully, "Why did you choose a green heart, your highness? We know the meaning of the white heart and the black heart, but what is the meaning of the green heart?" The princess said, laughing, "Direct your question to the heart seller." Esphines was silent, listening, and gloomy. He said, "The green heart, O great one, is a symbol of fertility and tenderness. The princess said, I am in dire need of this heart, because sometimes I feel that I am cruel to the point that I enjoy being cruel to myself. Meanwhile, Judge Senmut was looking at Zulu for a long time, and tried to divert his brother-in-law's attention to him, but she refused to turn away from the boxes of precious stones, and the judge said, disgusted by the sight of the dwarf, what an ugly creature. Esphine said, he is from a people of dwarfs who do not like our image, and they believe that the creator distorted her features and made her limbs ugly. Governor Kanzar laughed loudly and said, this statement of yours is more surprising than Zulu himself, and all that he has endured of strange animals and precious things. I see this young man letting our thoughts be disturbed by his imagination, said Senmut, eyeing Esphines with a suspicious look. Surely those dwarfs cannot understand the meaning of good or bad. Princess Amonreeds turned to the dwarf apologetically, and said, are you displeased to look at my face, Zulu? Then Kanzar returned to his laughter, and Esphine's heart was shaken by what he saw of the splendor of her beauty and the charm of her charm. At that moment he wished to look at her continuously, and silence prevailed after that, so the young man realized that the time had come to leave, and he feared that the ruler would dismiss him without broaching the topic that concerned him, so he said to the ruler, is it possible, O venerable ruler, for me to aspire to realize my hopes under your generous patronage? The ruler thought, and his hand played with his thick, black beard. Then he said, our people are tired of war and conquest and are drawn to luxury and bliss, and they are naturally above trade, so there is no way to these precious pearls except by adventurers like you, but I do not like to give you my word now. So I should speak before that is my lord the king, and I will raise to his higher self the most beautiful of these precious things, hoping that he will agree with my opinion. Isphines was relieved and said, Mr. Governor, I am keeping for our Lord Pharaoh a precious gift that was made especially for his highest self. The ruler looked at his face carefully, and an idea occurred to him to approach his master. He said, at the end of this month, Pharaoh will celebrate Victory Day as he has done for 10 years, and it is possible that I will make you and your dwarfs a pleasant surprise for the king, so that you will present to him your gift that is undoubtedly worthy of the highest position. So tell me your name and your position. I am called, Your Majesty, Isphines, and I am staying where my caravan is anchored on the shore of the Fisherman's Quarter, south of Thebes. My messenger will come one day soon. The young man bowed in great reverence, and left the place followed by his servants. The princess looked at his face as he told the ruler about his hopes, and listened to him. She followed him with her eyes as he left the place. She was amazed at the nobility and beauty that appeared on his face and stature, and was sorry that his lot in this world was trading and carrying dwarfs. Oh, how she wished to find this stature in the body of one of her people who were prone to obesity and shortness, but she found it in the body of a brown Egyptian who trafficked in dwarfs. And she felt that the image of this beautiful boy stirred an emotion in her soul, so she looked angry, and turned her back on the ruler and his family and left the foyer.